You're right there guys, this is Dale of Lone Wombat Airsoft, and today we're taking a look at the Black Hills Airsoft site up in Chesterfield. Now if you've not seen these reviews before, the way we always do it is I put annotations there and there, so if there's a part you want to skip ahead to, you can just click on any of those and it'll take you straight there. Now I want to make this clear, this is a first impression review of the site. I've never been to it before, so I can only talk about what I saw on the day I turned up. This means, of course, that it's entirely possible that I turn up on a good day, but also equally likely that I turn up on a bad day as well. So try and keep that in mind as we go through this review. And without further ado, we'll just dive straight into it. So the site's located in Chesterfield, just beyond the village of New Whittington. Now, I need you to pay attention for this part because the entrance to this site is incredibly easy to miss. I've got my sat-nav locked into it, I've even looked up on Google Maps where it was, and I still drove past it twice. The sat-nav actually dropped me on the same street as the site entrance, but slightly further down from it, so you had to drive a little bit further on. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw up an image just here of the road leading up to the site entrance and the entrance itself. Now, the key thing you have to note here is there's a couple of things that's going to throw you off. First of all, there's a curb outside of it, so it doesn't actually look like it's an actual road as such. It just looks like part of the hedgerow, so it can be easy to confuse it for that. That's what threw me off the first time I drove past. But also there's three separate routes on it. Obviously the one on the left leads up to a house. The one on the right actually leads to a farmhouse, which is a private lane, so definitely don't go up that one. The one you're looking for is this one in the middle just here. You want to go straight up that, follow the road up the hill. It can get a little bit steep, a little bit muddy. I imagine on a very, very wet day or a couple of weeks worth of rain, this might be quite treacherous to get up, but it was fine enough for me when I turned up and there was rain throughout the day on that one. So you just drive up there, you're going to find yourself in a large open space with a green shed off to the left. This is the car park and the safe zone, so there should be a couple of ones pulled up already. Just pull up next to there, unload your gear and wander into that shed over there, which serves as your safe zone for the day. So walk-on fees for the day were £20 if you're not a member and £15 if you are. If you're in need of hire kit, then £30 is going to get you a hire gun, full face mask and 1,000 rounds worth of ammo. Now it is worth noting that the lunch is not included in your walk-on fee. What they do for this is they have a menu from the local takeout place. You just select what you want from there and someone will drive off site and get it delivered to the location by lunchtime comes around. Now I particularly didn't mind this, to be honest, because I managed to get myself a miniature full English for £2, so that was fairly nice to have in the middle of the day. There are no bathrooms on site at all. Obviously, it's a forest, if you're absolutely desperate, you can just wander off into the forest, but you're not too far away from civilization either, so there was plenty of downtime in between the games that gave you opportunity to drive off into Chesterfield proper and find somewhere for that. The safe zone has a large shed-like structure. Now, this is mainly what they use for signing on for the day, as well as storing a couple of drinks, ammo and grenades and stuff that they can sell you throughout the day, as well as all the hire guns. It's got a solid roof over it, but it's not complete yet. There are some framework for where they're obviously wanting to put in some benches to sit down on but they weren't complete on the day that I turned up in, but they looked like they were halfway there, so I can imagine in a couple of weeks' time, if not now, they'll be complete by then. So at the time when I turned up, there was no indoor seating or place to set up, but there was plenty of open space on the outside, and there was a large log just outside this shed that you could sit on when you're resting in between games. So I wasn't too bothered about that, but give it a couple of weeks or so and hopefully they'll have those benches in the shed complete. So the staff on the site were very welcoming when I first turned up. It was easy to get talking to them and ask them questions about how the day was going to go, what they had in mind, that sort of thing. The safety brief was kept short and to the point right at the start, and they'd ask any questions that the players might have if something perhaps wasn't delivered quite as clearly as they needed to understand it properly. During the games themselves, you could always see a marshal. This is mainly due to the fact that we were playing in a small area during the day, but they were always keeping an eye on the players to make sure everything was going smoothly. You'd even get a couple of player marshals joining the teams in the action itself so that they get a more ground level perspective of what's going on during the games. One thing I have to give a bit of praise for is that they were actually willing to listen when the players were suggesting potential improvements for games or new ones. They were even putting on a couple of completely player-suggested games at the end of the day. And that's always something I like to see. It just shows that they're not completely fixated on what they had in mind for the site and they're willing to listen to what the players think might make it more enjoyable. As for the players themselves, now one thing I think I need to mention is that there were only ever 8 people in the games at any one time. Now I'll go into detail later why I didn't find this an issue on the day. But considering how it was the first event of the year and it was absolutely chucking it down with rain in the first half of the day, I've been told it's abnormally small numbers for the site, and personally I can quite believe that. but it is still a fairly small and localish site. One thing as well about the players, hit taking throughout the day was absolutely flawless. Now, during the games themselves, there are 1 or 2 instances where I thought that a player wasn't taking his hits, but this was mainly due to the fact that there was a very high wind on the site during the day, and players like to take cover behind a lot of brambles, which catch and deflect BBs at the last minute. So when I actually went home and rewatched the footage from my sniper scope, I could quite clearly see that all the shots that I thought might have been a player not taking his hits were actually complete misses. So massive props to the players on the day, because I could not find a single instance of non-hit taking. So the terrain on site is almost completely virgin woodland. There's only 1 or 2 instances where there's some man-made obstacles in the way, such as this circle of barrels just outside the safe zone. There's also a couple of barricades that have been put in between trees. Essentially, they're just chopped up trees and they've propped them up between a couple more to form a barricade behind that you can hide behind. So if you were looking for a lot of high-quality man-made structures, you're going to be let down in that regard. You're going to have to use the woodland itself to find cover. Luckily, however, the woodland itself is really good for this. The hillside itself tends to be, has a lot of small undulating hills, as opposed to a place like Black Dagger, which has a very long, steep one. This is lots of smaller ones, but not quite as high. So they're big enough that you can hide in the dips between the hillsides and take cover from that. But they're also very clear on the forest floor, so you can run between different sections of cover quite easily. And this is something I managed to take great advantage of. Obviously, because the terrain is, it's got a little bit of verticality on the site, it's going to be challenging for some players just wandering around. They may get tired at the end of the day, but for me personally, I absolutely loved it. Another thing is that we were only playing in a very small section of the site on the day. Because there were such low numbers, we didn't need to use the vast majority of it, but I did manage to have a run around before the games began, just taking a couple of photos of the place. And the distinct impression it left me is that there's a lot of wide open spaces in sections of the site. You've got some good clusters of woodland surrounding it, but there are some large empty spaces that I like to call a no man's land, which I can imagine would be incredibly difficult to try and cross. Obviously you can go around them, but that's going to be highly contested. So it'll be very interesting to see how games like that play out. What the site might benefit from is a couple of portable bits of man-made cover that they can just take home at the end of the day and stuff it back in the shed. So then they can rearrange the site from that. Obviously it's a very small business at the moment, so this might be something that is going to be a lot longer down the line, but just a potential suggestion for there. Obviously I've not played in it, so I don't know what the larger section of the site would be like to play, but that's just something I got from it. Another distinct impression this site left me is that if you have a long range and accurate gun, you will absolutely dominate these games. Even just using my bog standard JG Bar 10 right here, I managed to rack up a fairly impressive kill count by the end of it, just because the area in between you and your target is for the most part incredibly clear. There's none of those little tiny insignificant twigs just sticking out and you unluckily hit it and deflect it at the last minute. There's very little of that. There's maybe a bit of brambles where you're hiding and where the target is, but there's next to nothing in the middle, so you're able to get off some very good sniper shots on this site. One thing to note about the site as well is that the site owners don't completely own the land. It's not exclusive and private. There were a couple of instances where a ceasefire had to be called because someone walking their dog was getting a bit too close for comfort for on the site. There was also an instance where the actual site owner's son, I think it was, turned up on a motorbike and was just mucking around in the top end of the site. He was kept well away from the games, so that didn't interfere with it, but there was a good 10-15 minutes around the lunchtime where we're just finding out what his deal was on that. So that may be something that could interrupt the games on another day, but in fairness, there's very little woodland sites that I've been to where that isn't a problem. A lot of people just see a woodland and assume they can walk through it. So overall then, I had incredibly good fun in the small section of the woodland I got to sample. There were a lot of flanking routes available and a surprising amount of paths in just a small area. But I'd be very interested to see how the rest of the site plays out, and that might be something I'll look into in the future. So the games on the day tended to be very fast-paced and close-action sort of affairs. What we started off doing is a attack and defend up the hillside. What would happen is we'd start at the bottom, defenders would start on an objective. Whenever the defenders were hit, they'd fall back to the next one, and once we cleared it out, we could respawn from that position we just took, and we'd progress through the site like that. About 3 or 4 different positions we attacked in that game. There was another one where a barrel was placed in the middle of the road and we had respawn points on either end of it. We had to capture the barrel and drag it back to our respawn point. There was another where we had to locate a hostile downed pilot. Now, obviously we had to actually shoot them, then medic them back in, and then drag them back to our extraction point for that one. But that was hard to do because if we lost possession of the pilot, like all our guys were taken out, they were allowed free rein to go off and hide again and keep shooting people. So that made that a little bit interesting. There was a capture the flag type gameplay where we had to obviously go to the opponent's respawn point, nick a placard which was their team colour and bring it back to ours, but we needed ours at the base as well. It was no good if we'd both stolen them at the same time because then you didn't have both flags, you had to go back and get yours, so that was quite fun as well. Basically, there was a hell of a lot of varied and interesting variety kind of games on offer today. There was just one that I thought dragged on a little bit too long, and this is where we were attacking the barrel circle just outside the safe zone, and the idea was you had to have 2 people in it at any one time, and once that started, a timer would start from 5 minutes, and once it got to 0, you won. The thing was that once the people inside were taken out, that timer was reset. So you'd have to retake it and it will start the 5 minutes all over again. What would have made that a bit more streamlined is if instead of completely resetting the time, it would start off again from where you last left it. So potential improvement for that one. So it dragged on a little bit too long, but it was still good fun regardless. What I have to give credit to the site owners for is that they actually managed to make the games interesting and fun, even with only just 8 players on site. The thing was, you were only ever fighting 3 or 4 people, but the way the games were set up, you were always fighting 3 or 4 people. There was none of this wandering through the woodland trying to find a target, because the spawn points were so close and everyone was on a one-hit regen or a very fast medic for some games. It made it very, very fast and high-intensity action kind of things, because even though you just took a guy out, it'd only take him 30 seconds, a minute or so to wander back to the regen point and jump straight back in. So that meant that nobody was bored. There was always something going on. And so that's why I felt that even though there was a very low player count on the day, the game organisers managed to make it still a fun experience for everyone involved. So is the Black Hills Airsoft site in Chesterfield worth paying a visit to? Well, if you're the kind of player that's looking for something a bit more compact and local, maybe you're a bit put off by games that have a ridiculously high player count and you want something a bit more smaller and tactical orientated, then perhaps there's a site you definitely want to go and check out. As I said, if you haven't gathered already, it's a very small operation, but I do see a lot of potential here. If they can get some more man-made barricades to put in throughout the site, I think this is going to turn into a real gem in a couple of months. Obviously, you're going to have a small player base to contend with, but as I've said, the site organisers can deal with that. And also, you might get a couple of people wandering close to the woodlands that might put the game on pause for a minute or two just while they wander off again. These on-site facilities aren't complete. Obviously, they don't have bathrooms, and the benches in the safe zone weren't finished, but I do think they'll be done relatively soon because they were halfway there when I turned up. So a little bit of a rough diamond at the moment, but I do think give it some time and a slightly bigger player base, you're going to find yourself a great local site here, and I certainly had fun on the day. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this site review of the Black Hills Airsoft site in Chesterfield. If you've got any questions you'd like to ask, maybe you want to share your own experiences of this site for someone else to read, just put them in the comments down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And until next time, this has been Dale of Lone Wombat Airsoft. What I don't like about it is if you don't pull the handle up high enough before you pull it back, you've just knocked the gun unsafe. So then when you return it, go to fire, nothing happens. This has caught me out more times than I care to mention. It's incredibly infuriating, so much so that it's now routine for me that after every single bolt change, I just push it forward just to make sure that it is actually there. It catches you out that much.